What if I told you that before the Australian Grand Prix even started, several drivers were already furious with the FIA? What if Lewis Hamilton, now dressed in red, decided to launch a direct bomb against the new 2026 regulation because he believes something is not right? We are not talking about a simple technical adjustment. We are talking about a change that could alter the balance of power in Formula One, just when the grid is more even than ever. The FIA has made a move. The teams have remained silent, but the pilots, not anymore. And what is brewing behind the 2026 regulations could mark the destiny of the championship, even before the traffic lights go out at Albert Park. The 2026 regulation is not a simple evolutionary update. It is a structural transformation. New power units with greater electrical prominence, more aggressive energy redistribution, reduction of the impact of the combustion engine, revised aerodynamics, platforms more sensitive to energy control, and above all, a philosophy that alters the competitive DNA of the current Formula One. The technical adjustments to battery and energy management rules ahead of the Australian Grand Prix are not a simple regulatory detail. We are talking about the core of the 2026 regulation and a point that has generated real concern within the paddock. The 2026 concept considerably increases the prominence of the electrical system within the power unit. The new hybrid architecture reduces the relative weight of the combustion engine and increases the role of the electrical component to a distribution close to 50% in certain phases of maximum performance. This represents a structural change compared to the previous generation. During initial testing and simulations, several teams identified a potential problem. Electrical dependence could force drivers to manage power too aggressively on the straightaway. In practical terms, this means that if the battery runs out before the end of an acceleration stretch, the car abruptly loses top speed. In a racing scenario, that can translate into noticeable speed differences between cars that, in theory, should be competing on equal terms. The FIA then began to review certain technical parameters ahead of Australia. It is not about changing the total capacity of the battery, but rather studying how that energy can be used during the lap. Among the points that are being evaluated are the maximum power of electrical deployment per lap, the limit of usable energy in certain phases, and the balance between recovery and delivery. The objective is to prevent the car from having dead zones, where it loses performance simply due to energy limitation. The problem is that any adjustment now directly affects the projects that the teams are already developing for 2026. Weight distribution, cooling of the hybrid system, engine integration, rear aerodynamics, and even the development strategy depend on the role that the battery ultimately plays. If the electrical prominence is slightly reduced, that may alter which manufacturer starts with a technical advantage. That is why the tension is not only technical but political. Each modification in energy management can benefit one design philosophy over another. And in a category where eras can be defined by poorly balanced rules from the start, no one wants to be on the wrong side. On a circuit like Australia, with long straights, DRS zones, and strong braking that allows recovery, energy management can become a determining factor. If the regulations are not perfectly calibrated, the difference will not only be made by the driver or the chassis, but by the ability to conserve battery at the exact moment. And when you change the technical basis, you change the balance. The problem is not just what changes, it's when and how. And now, in 2026, something more than a championship is at stake. Pilots fear that technical decisions are being rushed without full consensus. They fear that some manufacturers are further ahead in electrical development. They fear that energy redistribution will favor certain chassis concepts over others. And above all, they fear that the show will be subordinated to a political battle between the federation, teams, and motorcyclists. That's why the reaction was so strong. Because when a driver like Hamilton issues a public warning before the season starts, it is not a simple complaint. It is a direct message. The future cannot be decided in offices without listening to those who are inside the car. And most importantly, he wasn't the only one upset. The silence of the rest of the grid is not compliance. It is contained tension. And Australia, far from being just the first race on the calendar, became the starting point of a silent war that could explode long before 2026. The core of the conflict is in the new hybrid architecture. The FIA wants the 2026 power unit to have a higher electric ratio, significantly reducing the strategic weight of the internal combustion engine. In theory, this seeks sustainability, efficiency, and attracting new manufacturers. In practice, it means that energy management will be even more critical than pure straight line speed. And this is where the pilots raise their hands. Because more electrical dependence implies more lift and coast, more artificial management, more moments in which the pilot does not attack because he must save battery. It involves cars more sensitive to energy maps than to pure aggressiveness. It involves more calculated racing. The message that has come from the surroundings of several drivers is clear. They need stability. They need the FIA to define a closed direction and not modify it on the fly. Because each adjustment generates uncertainty. And uncertainty creates an advantage for those who are better informed or further along in the process. Furthermore, there is a political factor that cannot be ignored. In 2026, new manufacturers enter. New alliances. New economic interests. And the feeling within the paddock is that the sporting balance could be being conditioned by this commercial expansion. Hamilton is not just any driver. He is a figure with institutional weight. When he speaks before Australia and publicly questions the direction of the regulations, he is sending a signal. Drivers do not want to be mere executors of technical decisions designed without their participation. Because in the end, they are the ones who manage the car when the power runs out. They are the ones who feel when the system limits more than it powers. They are the ones who must explain to the fans why they cannot attack in certain phases of the race. And if the 2026 regulation amplifies that problem, the show can pay the price. Meanwhile, the FIA defends its position. Sustainability, innovation, safety, and cost control. Solid arguments. But in Formula One, perception matters as much as the norm. And right now, the perception within the paddock is that a very fine line is being walked. Because if 2026 is born with imbalances, now we enter the truly dangerous part. Because when a regulation generates distrust before it even comes into force, the consequences are not only sporting, they are political, they are contractual, and they can change the future of several key drivers. The 2026 regulation is not simply a technical sheet. It is the basis on which multi-million-dollar investments will be decided. It is the project that will determine which manufacturers will dominate the new reinforced hybrid era. And if within the paddock there is a perception that the management is not stable or that certain actors may be better positioned from the beginning, the reaction does not stop at public statements. The internal pressure begins. Teams are beginning to demand clarity. The pilots begin to position themselves. And contract negotiations are beginning to include more aggressive performance clauses. Hamilton, who faces this stage with Ferrari as possibly his last major competitive project, cannot allow himself to enter an era where the regulations favor structures that are already advanced in electrical development. Not after experiencing how a well-interpreted engine architecture defined an entire decade. His reaction is not emotional, strategic. Because if 2026 is born with a structural advantage for a specific manufacturer, the championship could be decided for years. And no one wants to repeat that. Additionally, there is a domino effect that few are openly pointing out: the stability of the pilot market. When the regulations change radically, drivers look at where they want to be before the new era begins. If confidence in the technical direction weakens, strategic moves may come forward. What starts as public criticism can end up as a total reconfiguration of the paddock. It is an open championship. And that is precisely why the moment of conflict is so delicate. Because when the competition is balanced, any shadow over the future weighs twice as much. The FIA maintains that 2026 will be more sustainable, more innovative, more efficient. The drivers maintain that it must also be clearer, more stable, and more competitive on the track. The crash is not frontal yet, but it already exists. And when figures like Hamilton raise their voices even before the championship gains real speed, the message is unmistakable. The new era cannot be built ignoring those who are going to pilot it. The 2026 regulation has not yet been born, but the battle for its legitimacy has already begun. And if it is not managed well, the political war could be more intense than any fight on the track. The 2026 regulation has not yet debuted. We haven't even seen those cars run in an official race. And yet, he is already dividing the paddock. What started as a technical adjustment has become a public warning. Lewis Hamilton didn't just talk. He didn't drop that bomb before Australia by chance. He did it because he understands something that many prefer to ignore. In Formula One, eras are not won only on the track. They are won when the regulations are written. If the new hybrid architecture is born with imbalances, the next decade could be marked from day one. If energy management outweighs pure aggressiveness, the spectacle may change. If the FIA fails to convey stability and consensus, internal trust may fracture. And when trust is fractured in Formula One, the consequences are profound. The question is who will benefit. And the most important question, are we facing a necessary evolution or the beginning of a new political war within the Great Circus? What is clear is that the pilots are no longer willing to remain silent. The 2026 regulation has not yet started, but the battle for control is already underway.